Hey, I'm Sarah Catherine Van Valera. Grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and I work at New Belgium Brewing Company, touring around all day, hanging out with folks, drinking beers, talking about beer, and it's super great. New Belgium is 20 years old. We got our start in a basement here in Fort Collins. It's up the road, actually, kind of northeast of here, or northwest. Jeff Lebesch was an engineer in the late 80s, and he had to go to Europe on some business, and he thought, if I'm going to be in Europe, I'm going to dive into European-style beers. Jeff was a home brewer, and it was his passion, his creative outlet. It's what he did to unwind from the day, and he thought, there's something missing here. I want more. I want more. So he started doing some research on where he should spend his time when he was in Europe. And he comes across a book by a man named Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson has been all over the world tasting some of the most incredible beers. And his goal was to elevate beer to the way people think about wine. People thought wine was very classy, but they didn't really think beer was. So Jeff is loving this reading. It's so great. It's so inspiring. And he realizes that Michael Jackson loves Belgian beers. Diving in and realizes that the Belgians are extremely creative with their beer styles. They're willing to just do whatever they want. They're like, oh, hey, we grow lots of coriander. Let's use that in our beer. Jeff decides he's going to spend his time in Belgium, and he's got a brand new bike, a stump jumper. So he decides he's going to ride this mountain bike through Belgium and basically explore their breweries and their bars. One bar that he has to spend his time at is the Brew. The Brew.'s teeny tiny bar maybe seats 20 folks, but they have over 300 beers on tap and in bottles, only Belgian styles. So Jeff figures, all right, this is the place I should really spend some time. An entire day to spend at the Brew, because the Brew is closed every single Wednesday. And Michael Jackson failed to mention this in all of his kind of ravings about how great this bar was. And he's about to leave, but he notices that there's a little handwritten note just kind of scrawled on and taped to the window. Due to a Catholic holiday, they're going to be open at 4 p.m. So the only Wednesday of the year that the Brew is open is the one Wednesday Jeff shows up on. He's sitting down and he's got his notebook out and he's taking notes on the flavor, what it looks like, how it feels in his mouth, all those things that you would do with wine, right? He's doing with beer. And he's not quite sure about this beer, so he asks a very detailed question about the yeast. And Jan realizes pretty quickly that Jeff didn't just show up halfway around the world to drink a beer in his bar, that he knew something and he wanted to know more. Jan takes it upon himself to prove to Jeff that Belgian beers are the best in the world. And he really leans in and starts answering all of his questions, every single one he's got. And if he can't answer it, he pulls a book off the shelf. And Jan starts pulling beers out of his private selection to share with Jeff. And the entire time he's scrawling away in this notebook about this experience. And he's realizing that this sort of beer culture that's very, very prevalent in Belgium isn't prevalent in the United States. And he craves this kind of experience where you can just sit down and talk to your bartender and ask him all kinds of crazy questions about the beer and he'll be able to answer it. So he wants to bring this home and he buys yeast while he's over there. He brews up Abbey Ale. That's the first beer he did when he came home from Belgium. And he meets a girl, Kim Jordan. She's currently our CEO. She is our co-founder. And she's noticing a lot of things about Jeff. That he's not completely fulfilled in this engineering job, that they're getting invited to a lot more parties, and it makes sense to her that there's a product here. People love what he's showing up with, this Abbey and this fat tire. And she's like, Jeff, you should quit your job and start a brewery. He realizes that the problem is that you can't sell beer out of your home. If the basement is not a part of your home, there is no problem. So he walls up the door between the house and the basement, builds another door on the outside of the basement, gives it a separate address, and calls it New Belgium Brewing Company. done. But by 2002, we'd expanded so much. We're growing our markets. We're brewing so many other styles of beer that we added on Brewhouse 2. Both of these are Steinecker systems. And there's some cool things about Brewhouse 2. We've got a heat exchanger. We've got a very cool boil kettle. So, Fat Tire, cheers. Enjoy. Basically, we add the hops and spices downstairs in some tanks, and they're injected into the bottom of the tank instead of through the top window like normal. And it's because we've got that cone-shaped hot plate that we're actually able to boil 200 barrels worth of wort in 45 minutes, because it's just flash boiling as it streams across that hot plate. That saves us on a massive amount of evaporation, on time, energy. Another kind of cool thing we've got going on in the brew house here is that when we cool the wort down after we're done getting all the hop and spice flavors and stuff, it's hitting a heat exchanger. Big box of tightly packed metal plates. Hot wort rushes through there, heating those plates up. We send cold water through the other way, cooling those plates down. And we're able to actually cool that wort and heat the water simultaneously. And that's one of 3 heat exchangers we have throughout the brew house. So real quick, I kind of want to explain these mosaics. They're very, very representational of us. First of all, a local artist put these together for us, and it's all reclaimed tiles. And so this one at the far end, when you get a chance to wander around there, it's kind of all the things that you might enjoy doing while also drinking a beer. So my favorite one on there is probably the disco ball. You should check that out. In the people. If given the truth, they can be depended upon to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts and beer. Thank you, Abraham Lincoln. You will see the Church of Fermentology. This is the reason why we come to work every day. This is it. This is our livelihood right here. So our wort is hitting that heat exchanger, cooling down, rushing past the yeast room, and comes to live in one of these fermentation tanks. They're all glycol jacketed, so we can control that temperature to a degree no matter what the weather is outside. Once it's ready to be packaged, if it's going to be kegged, it stays at the mothership. If it's going to be bottled and canned, it takes this beer bridge right here to the Thunderdome. That white building there is the malt castle, so all of our malt comes in there. The 2 silver tanks that you see with the blue spigots, that's actually where, those are our spent grain tanks. So a local farmer swings by twice a day with his big 18-wheeler, loads up all the spent grain and takes it back to his farm. Some lucky cows get a good lunch. And actually, I feel like a lot of breweries actually have that sort of relationship with farmers, just because we don't want to brew with that spent grain anymore, but it's still really high in nutrients. So, and we also send off our spent yeast as well, because again, it's really high in protein. So, so you may be wondering, hey, IPAs aren't necessarily a Belgian style of beer. That's kind of weird. But we figured the spirit of the Belgians would be like, yeah, we'll do an IPA, why not? And actually, they did do an IPA. Anyone familiar with Belgo? The beer we just came out with not long ago? Awesome American style. We're using American hops in an American IPA. That makes sense. But you know, you've probably heard the term that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So for 20 years, we've been imitating these Belgian styles because we are so excited about how beautiful and creative they are and how delicious. And one time in history, did the Belgians look at an American style and they were like, wow, that's a great beer. That's the American IPA. And then it comes to live in one of these wine barrels for up to 3 years, where we're introducing it to a wild yeast known as Brettanomyces. And so it gives it this incredibly like sour pucker flavor. This is the kind of beer you want to open up a little bit, right? So you let wine open up, you let this beer open up, right? So it's warming in your hands, it's releasing different flavors. The interesting thing about beer is you don't want to serve it too cold because that will mask flavor. It will also mask lack of flavor. So letting a beer kind of open up is a good thing, right? Coors is an all right beer, man. Coors is all right. So, yeah, so these wine barrels are from France and Napa Valley. We've got 18 of these, and we're getting several more. We are currently the largest sour seller in the United States, and we're growing. And it was definitely inspired by Peter Buchart, our brewmaster, who's from Belgium. He came to us from a brewery called Rodenbach. Give this beer quite a bit of effort to get used to. It takes 3 years to get this beer ready. It's a blended beer, so we're taking a young barrel and an old barrel and blending them, and it's all done by palate. So our brewmaster, Peter Buchart, and the several cellar workers, cellar operators that we have come through and taste out of each of these barrels. When they decide that, hey, this flavor is about right, they'll look for an older barrel or a younger barrel, and they'll blend. It's kind of interesting because we're doing a light sour and a dark sour. So the dark one is known as Oscar. The light one we call Felix. So La Folie is a blending of a young Oscar and an old Oscar. And it's freaking incredible. We get people who waltz in here and they're like, I don't drink beer. What can I taste that doesn't taste like beer? And I'm like, here's the best beer we make, La Folie. It's the most precious beer we've got, to be honest. And it kind of all started with Peter Buchart. It's kind of interesting. He calls it La Folie, right? So that's French for the folly or crazy madness.
I promised her I would do that.